Welcome to this edition of the YAHOWAH blog. We're here in the library studio. As you can see, I have a couple of very highly trained and professional co-hosts. Asher and Wookie and the accompaniment chair for this program. Actually, what we're going to do is begin this program where I promised we'd initiate during the last conclusion, which is in the profound prophecy that Gabriel, who is actually David. Gabriel means God's most capable and courageous, competent man. And he is presented throughout the prophecies in Daniel as a man, as a human. What he has to say in the 9th chapter is exceedingly profound, and they're just one amazingly important revelation after another. And I don't want to just have skipped over them without giving them their due, even though we will return to the 9th chapter and cover this material a second time, if you will. But let's go right back into what Gabriel said, pursuant to this last 7 years, and also pursuant to his own fulfillment of Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, and what would be 33 CE, almost 2,000 years ago. He said, the many promises associated with Shabuah and the Shabat. Now, this is from Shabuam and Shibaim. Shabuah is the name of the fourth of Yahweh's 7 annual invitations to meet. It is the next Mikra, the next Mikra in the singular, invitation to meet with God to be fulfilled. It is a harvest, and it will transpire. It transpires every year, but the two that pertain to prophecy would be either or both the 22nd of May in 2026, which could well be the time that Israel is thinned in what is called the two-state solution to give the so-called Palestinians a terrorist state of their own from which they will seek to destroy Israel. Or it could be the 11th of June the following year, also a Shabat, in 2027, which is likely the time of the Shabuah harvest. So these are both important Shabuah events, and that is how he begins his prophecy. And Shibim would be promises. It could also be sevens. It's the same root, just pronounced differently. So the many promises associated with Shabuah and the Shabat. Among the vows pertaining to the thing, 7 represents even 7 sevens. So all of these things are important. We're approaching the 7th millennia of Yah, which is what all of this is being set up to accomplish. The fulfillment of Shabuah, Teruah, Kippurim, and Sukkah all established the path to the 7th millennia, which will begin at the conclusion of Sukkah in 2033. And as I've said, Shabbat is the Hebrew word for promise. It is the word for 7, and it is the word for Shabbat. And this began with the Hebrew word for Shabuah, speaking of the harvest. So the many promises associated with the Shabuah and the Shabbat, along with the vows pertaining to the thing 7 represents, even 7 sevens, are determined and decreed. This means that God has decided upon these things on behalf of your people. And he's speaking to Daniel, so your people would be Yisrael and the extended family, Al-Ata. Is almost always addressing Israel and the people and the family who are related by kin. And upon your set-apart city and its distinctly uncommon inhabitants. The set-apart city would be the city of David, and It is the city named Jerusalem, a name that means the source from which guidance and instructions regarding reconciliation flow. And the reason that the inhabitants are called Kodesh, which means set apart and distinct, uncommon, is because Yahweh chose Yisrael, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, to be his people. And they are now at a time in our almost immediate future going to once again be distinct unto Yahweh. And so all of this is on behalf of Jerusalem and of Yehudim and Israelites, these very distinctly unique people and place. And it's all to bring an end to religious rebellion, eliminating the revolting, communal defiance, and contrarian views. This will actually continue. Are you coming? Come on. Come on. Come on. Are you coming? Oh. I was going to bring the Wookiee up. He almost jumped in my lap, but at the last moment he deferred and is going in circles around the desk. So excuse my interruption. But the religious rebellion has been Israel's primary problem now for, well, going on 3,450 years. They were, thank you, Leah. There you go, Wookiee. You can co-host here up close and personal, buddy. So nothing bothers Yahweh more than the religious rebellion of his people. Judaism is a major irritant. It is what separates Yahweh from Yehudim, even to this day. And what Dode is saying here is that a time is going to come, particularly in this city of Jerusalem, and among those who are unique, who return to Jerusalem, that there will be an end to religious rebellion. The communal defiance and contrarian views that are so sadly but necessarily documented throughout the Torah during the Exodus, where the children of Israel were obnoxious towards God, and where God finally, through the prophet Hosea, said, "You are not my people," and he divorced them. And he divorced them because of their religiosity. Well, the time will come when Israel's religious rebellion through Judaism and also through Christianity and Islam, because rabbis created all three religions, will come to an end. And there will be no more defiance against God. That terminus date, however, is still in our future. It is 8 years from now, 2033. This program is being brought to you in the early evening of the 1st of September, a Monday in 2025. And so 8 years from now, on Towrah, in year 2033, which is year 6,000 Yah, we are going to finally bring rebellion to an end. And there are so many things that happen on that day, and we will speak of them. And we have spoken of them because it's essential to know the purpose of that sacrifice of the Adamah Parah that will transpire at this time. The Palmoni is another term that was used here in Daniel to describe the one who will be offering his corporeal body to heal Yisrael of her religiosity. We then read that this will also affix the signature which seals up the guilt associated with having missed the way and precluding being wrong. There is a very long narrative which we will reach eventually in this series of programs, presented in Bamidbar, Numbers 15, that describes precisely what the Makar and Par, it's listed under 4 or 5 different names for the bull, who is the Palmoni, who is the Adamah Parah. Is a very well-described plan where Yahweh makes it clear that while the lamb, who is Dode fulfilling Passover, matzah, and bakurim, can rid the covenant family of all forms of guilt and forevermore by taking all of our guilt and depositing it in Sheol, never to be seen again. The bull only resolves inadvertent guilt. The difference, the distinction here is highlighted in this text. He resolves the problem of those who are misled, not those who do the misleading. So, for example, if you were an Orthodox Jew and you were not belligerent about your religion, but were simply deceived by your father and by your rabbis and by other members of the community, such that your guilt against God for having missed the way was having been deceived, as opposed to being a rabbi or in the rabbi's immediate cadre of enablers where you're misleading. And this is a very important distinction. It's the distinction between the victimizer and the victim. The Palmoni, who is this bull on Towrah, can purge the mortal remnant who return to Jerusalem, this city, who are unique at this particular time because they are deemed capable of being restored. He will purge them of their guilt for having missed the way. So this is a very precise wording that comes from the Messiah, Dode. To provide reconciliation for error, purging the perverse corruptions and twisting perversions. It can purge, so there's actually two different events here. While the bull can purge the guilt of having missed the way, the lamb who was speaking can provide reconciliation for all manner of religious error. These events transpire at different times. They're 2,000 years apart. Dode fulfilling Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim in 33 CE, and his herald, this Palmoni from the previous context in Daniel from the 8th chapter, performs his role on Towrah in 2033. So even the most perverse corruptions can be resolved by Dode's sacrifice. And all of this is to arrive with and bring that which is eternally right, always correct, forever accurate and honest, thereby by attaining everlasting deliverance and vindication. Dode's sacrifice can do these things. It is the herald's sacrifice, the Palmoni in this case, who can deliver the mortal remnant so that they are receptive to this over the 1,000 years of the millennial Shabat that follows. So it is a magnificent plan that God has, whereby at the end, there still won't be a significant remnant of Yisrael who have let down their guard, who have walked away from religion, who have disavowed politics, who are no longer smeared by the culture, and therefore who are receptive to Dode and Yahowah, and can be purged of their inadvertent guilt. But they are not immortal because they don't know God. They don't know Dode. They don't know the Torah. They are unaware of the terms and conditions of the covenant, but they are at least at a point where they can go into the millennial Shabbat. They're at a point they can witness the return of Dode and Yahowah. They're purged and cleansed completely of their inadvertent guilt, so that with proper teaching, they're going to be in a position where they will be able to make a permanent and right decision. Further, the one who is arriving after fulfilling the means to vindication and perfection is Dode, and he is the one whom Yahowah repeatedly calls right, and he's speaking of himself. So this is the bow of the one who is eternally right. And that would be the arrival of Dowd himself as king, as he arrives with Yahowah on the day of reconciliation, Yom Kippurim, in 2033, to provide a personal seal and signature to revelation, confirming and completing these communications. The revelations that Yahowah provided prophetically get us into the millennial Shabat. That is their purpose. They get us into the millennial Shabat. As we grow from there, Yahowah is going to instill within us his Torah guidance and teaching, such that we can maneuver together through that time into forevermore together. But we have reached the point when we enter the Gan Eden, where sealed up and finished, confirmed, completed the prophetic declarations that Yahowah has provided. We will know that there is ongoing work to be done, just as there was in the garden 6,000 years ago. We'll be teaching these mortal remnants and the children that they conceive. And there will be work that Yahowah and Dowd will want accomplished, and we will be of service to them. It will be a great time of celebrating our relationship with our Heavenly Father and with his beloved Son. But the key point is that prophecy gets us to this point. It does not get us beyond this point, because there's no purpose to get us beyond this point, because that's once you have God's teaching installed into you, and you are now being taught by the covenant family, then you're in a really wonderful position for God to enjoy forevermore with you, and to allow this wonderful experience of celebrating life to play out from that point on. There's no reason that God would ever want to reveal that, because I don't think he wants to see it. I mean, he knows that with the covenant family having returned from the Shabuah and Towrah harvest, all there to guide this perfected mortal remnant of Yisrael, and the presence of their king, Dowd, who is returning as Elyon, as God's right hand, and as brilliant as the sun, and as powerful, really, as the Almighty, that things are going to play out beautifully and in an exciting fashion, with everybody liberated and empowered. And this is what God intended. You know, when things occasionally go astray, we've been told that Elia is there to nip them in the bud, and he will make certain that error doesn't turn into religion and go viral. So this is Yahowah's personal seal and Dowd's on revelation, on prophecy, and on these communications. It is also the time that we will be re-anointing the most set apart. When Dowd returns and becomes king forevermore, I am certain that Yahowah will anoint him, his Messiah, to lead his people, to guide us as our king and shepherd once again in our presence. And that at this point, his throne is going to be the Kipporah, the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. And we can be assured that Dowd will also be anointing it with the blood of the bull and the goat. So the most set apart, which is the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant, as it will be placed in a reestablished temple, a home to Yahowah's name. All of this is going to transpire, and it is going to receive a Mashiach, an anointing of the Kodesh Kodesh, of the most set apart. Therefore, know and gain insights to understand. God wants us to know, Yada, and he wants us to understand, Sakal. That is why this testimony is given. God has no interest in us believing, or our faith when we in fact can go way beyond believing in faith by knowing, by Yada, and that there is an empowerment even beyond that when we make the connections with what we have come to know to begin, understand, here conveyed as shakal, because there are many ways to convey intelligence and prudent discerning, active learning, being properly educated and intelligent, wise, so that we can perceive. And so this is something that follows, that you're going to have to be exceedingly perceptive and intelligent, knowing a huge swath of what God has made available, so that you can make the connections to understand what I'm sharing with you. And in fact, I think what I'm sharing with you, it's for the first time ever, that it actually has been revealed in a manner that can be understood right to the most important details. That from the going forth of the word to return, to restore, rebuilding Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the source of teaching and guidance on reconciliation. That's what the name means. Until the restoring testimony of the eternal witness, of the Son of the Sovereign, who is conspicuously making this known and who is providing the leadership and counsel of the Mashiach, the anointed Messiah. What Dode is saying here is Gabriel, is that while he is going to provide the exact date that he is going to fulfill Chag Matzah, not arrive to fulfill Passover, that he will complete his fulfillment of Chag Matzah, which is essential, because without the fulfillment of Matzah, Pesach is counterproductive. The way the rabbis celebrate it is counterproductive. The way it's presented in the Christian New Testament is counterproductive. What I mean by that is, if you were to observe Pesach but not Matzah, your soul becomes immortal, but still corrupted and therefore eternally estranged from God. And that means your soul cannot die, but has to be incarcerated in Sheol. So you don't want to do what the rabbis have done by celebrating Passover for 7 days and ignoring Matzah. And it is also conveying that not only is there going to be, and now has come, an individual who is a restoring witness, who is going to share the importance of understanding what I've just conveyed to you, that he is actually considered a son of the sovereign, that he is a neged. He is someone who is making what I'm sharing with you conspicuously known. And for the first time, he is providing leadership and counsel. He's the one who has been officially obtained by God and given the status of being properly appointed, so that he can expound upon, so he can announce, so he can proclaim the message of the Mashiach. Without the work that I'm doing for you now, where I have more effectively and completely and accurately rendered this testimony, and then explained it, making the connections needed to understand it and convey those insights with you, the Messiah is not known. You know, the world has been hoodwinked into believing that Jesus is the Messiah. No one named Jesus ever lived, certainly not in the first century, not in Judea, Yahudah. There is no eyewitness of a life of Iesu Christu. There is no contemporaneous report of anything that was said and done by an Iesu Christu. The first reference to an Iesu Christu is by Paul in 52 CE. And Paul would admit to being demon-possessed. And every time Paul attempted to validate his creation of Iesu Christu, he misquoted God without exception. He pulled something out of context that he could twist, and did so to convey the opposite message that God intended. And he did it over and over again. He committed every rational fallacy in the book. He contradicted himself. He has an exceedingly great ego. He never had a single accurate prophecy. He never once quoted his imaginary Iesu Christou, Gospel Jesus. Why? Because the Gospels hadn't been written and Jesus never existed. It was always, but I, Paul, say. So this myth of Jesus being the Messiah was one created by Paul in 52 CE. That is his first mention. And the first 14 books of the Christian New Testament were all Paul's letters. And when you finally get to a gospel, it's written 40 years after the fact. The first two, chronologically, by people who were part of Paul's posse, having not been eyewitnesses, not even been in the country at the time, not even being Hebrews, Jews, not even skilled in Hebrew. And they are Mark and then Luke, who copied most of what Mark had to say. And the Gospel of Mark is really the gospel according to Paul, who is the one who conceived the term gospel, euangelion, and said that there were various evangelions, but none of them mattered but his, including the ones that were ascribed to the disciples. And so the world, nearly 3 billion people today, have been fed a lie, and they believe that the Son of God and the Messiah is this fellow named Jesus when he never existed, when he was created by Paul, a man who in his second letter to the Corinthians signs off by admitting that he is demon-possessed. The first person to reveal that the Messiah and Son of God, the chosen one, the former and returning king, David, is the man who in his second of 3 lives volunteered to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim, and by his own admission, in his own hand, writing in first person in the 22nd and 88th Psalms, described specifically how he would fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim. And in fact, 1,000 years before he endured it, 700 years before crucifixion even existed, Dode explained precisely how it kills and how it would rob him of his mortal body, and then explained how his nephesh soul would carry our guilt into Sheol to perfect us, and then how his nephesh and Yahweh's ruach would protect him in Sheol, carry him back to Shamaim, where he would be the firstborn of Yahweh's covenant family. The first person in 2,000 years to tell you that, to figure it out, is the one being described right here that he said would make this known. What you need to know about the actual Messiah. He is David. And I use David because his name is Dode. Every song he wrote, his mizmor, his psalms, in his own hand, his name is spelled Daleth Wah Daleth. It is a Hebrew word. It means beloved, and that is his name. And every prophet that spoke of him wrote his name as Daleth Wah Daleth, Dode, over the next 300 years. It wasn't until the very last books written that the name was also given a yod, which would be Doed. The Wah always makes the O sound in Hebrew, and the Y would be like the Y in English, so it would be Doed. But there are 1/4 as many Doeds as there are Dodes, and all of the Dodes are either by Dode's own hand, and I think he probably knows his own name, or those prophets closest to his time, who most assuredly knew his name as well. And I only convey the corruption of his name so that you know who I'm talking about. And he said, so that of the anointed Messiah are 7 sevens, and the 7 promises and fulfilled vows. Therefore, in 62 weeks, she shall be restored. Speaking of the city of Jerusalem, and rebuilt to establish and fortify the way to grow and expand by being diligent and decisive in a troubled time of oppression. So it is true that the second home for Yahweh's name was rebuilt, but it was not rebuilt during a time of oppression. Therefore, the rebuilding here has to also speak of what will happen on Towrah, because that is the ultimate time of oppression, when the relationship between Yahweh and his people will finally materialize in the manner that Yahweh has long sought. Then after the 62 weeks, the anointed Messiah will be cut off and separated, but not for himself. Now that's an interesting statement, because the Messiah, Dod, he's speaking of himself here, and Yahweh 3 times refers to Dod specifically as his Messiah. He never ever speaks of a Jesus or an Ayusu or a Mr. Christ being a Messiah, never once. The only person that Yahweh says is my Messiah and speaks of being a Messiah in relation to his people in this way is Dod David. And he was not cut off on Passover. His Bashar body was killed on Passover, but he was not cut off. Dod, the Messiah, the king, was cut off and separated, Karath, on Matzah, which is when his soul carried our guilt and deposited it in Sheol, so that we would appear perfect before God, not guilty. That is when he was cut off. So he is speaking here of the fulfillment of Matzah. Gospel Jesus, not only didn't he exist, but in the midst of gospel Jesus, there is no mention of the fulfillment of Matzah. This is speaking of Dod. And it's interesting that when you do the math and go from 444 BCE and use the number of years that Dod provided here as the assessment, you end up in 33 CE, and the date is the last day of Chag Matzah that year. So even in the numbers, he's being precise and telling you that he was cut off and separated, but not for himself, on Chag Matzah. And therefore, he, as an exceedingly influential, self-aggrandizing, and overbearing person, will vault himself into prominence by arrogantly confirming and imposing a treaty, a covenant agreement, and an arrangement with a great many, including plenty of rabbis and a preponderance of people, especially elitists. Now, this is actually a fairly difficult transition, one of the more difficult transitions in the Torah and Prophets. And unfortunately, we do not have a Dead Sea Scrolls fragment or manuscript dating, or not dating, but from this particular chapter of Daniel. So this does not exist in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So my guess is there was something that was provided as a transition from one to another, because we're going here now from 33 CE to 2026 or 2027, when the Towrahless one, the adversary, the corporeal manifestation of Satan, will be the one who will be so exceedingly influential and self-aggrandizing. Now, one of the reasons, though, that Dode may have intended as Gabriel, this very abrupt transition from what he fulfills in 33 CE, which is year 4000 Yah, to what is going to happen by the Towrahless one, thought to be the Antichrist by Christians, in 2026, 2027, 2030, through that period of time, our immediate future, is that Hasatan wants to be worshipped as a god, but even more adroitly, if you look at the terminology that is applied to him in the testimony that Yashaya Isaiah provides in the 14th chapter of his book on prophecy, his quest is to be greater than Elyon. And Elyon is a term that Yahweh applies to Dode. If you read the 89th Mizmor, and Yahweh saying that he is returning with Dode, who will be as brilliant as the sun, and Elyon in his presence, then you know what I'm speaking of, that the Elyon is all things pertaining to the right hand of God. And so the best way to fool people is for Hasatan to pretend to be Dode. And the reason that's so devastating, and that's the essence of Christianity, when Paul created the myth of Jesus, it's not that he conceived him out of total imagination. He wasn't creative in this regard. Dode had been there. Dode is and was the Son of God. Dode is and was the Messiah. Dode is and was the King of Israel and will be the returning King of Israel and the world. And Dode David came to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim in 33 CE. And Dode David was crucified by his own admission. And Dode David's soul went into Sheol. Now, of course, there was no resurrection, and Dode didn't claim to be God. He is the Son of God. And so those ideas, the idea of a resurrection, a bodily resurrection of God himself dying, and of a man being God, that all came from Dionysus. So he stole that from Dionysus, and the rest of it he stole from Dode David, including him coming from Bethlehem. All of it. It's Dode David. That's who was crucified by the Romans in 33 CE. And so if Hasatan can convince people that this impostor is the Son of God who was crucified, then he annuls the benefits of Dode fulfilling Passover, opening the doorway to light. He annuls the benefits of God providing a way through his Torah to perfect us through matzah. He is annulling anybody's entry into the covenant through the fulfillment of Bakurim. And not only is he precluding salvation and eternal life by counterfeiting Dode David and creating this myth of Jesus Christ, he is doing more harm to aggravate Yahweh than anything else he could possibly do. And so that's what he did. And that's why it's written this way. And by making this abrupt transition, Dode is trying to help us understand that he is being counterfeited, that this being cut off, but not for himself, is being robbed from him by this exceedingly influential, self-aggrandizing, overbearing person who's going to vault himself into prominence by arrogantly confirming and imposing a treaty, a covenant agreement, and arrangement. When we read Yeshayah, Isaiah, in the 17th and 18th chapters, we realize that this is the very agreement that thins Israel at the waist, that makes Israel indefensible. And in the 18th chapter, there are some 72 adjectives that describe this exceedingly arrogant individual who is overbearing, who vaults himself into prominence, who perpetrates this betrayal of Israel, granting a state of terror, an Islamic state, to the Muslims so that they can destroy Israel. And Isaiah makes it clear that this is commiserate with the fulfillment of Shabuah. And therefore, it has to happen within the next 2 years, and likely within the next 10 months. And those adjectives describe one nation and one man: Donald Trump and the United States of America. And so that's why he made this transition. He wanted the world to know what was going to happen to his beloved nation during these last 7 years. He wanted to know he wanted us to know who would perpetrate that crime. He wanted to know that Hasatan would seek to counterfeit him, to rob his people and Dode himself of all that he had achieved and his accolades. It's the single most important discovery in human history, and I'm sharing it with you now. Whether you can accept it, process it, deal with it, that's up to you. But this is the truth. He's going to impose a different treaty, a different covenant, a bereth, but a bereth of his own, an arrogant bereth, as opposed to the one that God conceived for family. And it's going to be with a great many. The book of Daniel describes 10 heads of state. He calls them horns, which would be a boneheaded blowhard. And I've delineated the likely cast of characters that will make the 10 nation or 10 individuals from nations who will side with Trump in the affirming of the terror state called out of Israel's midst. Plus, at the United Nations, when this is voted on, the vote will be essentially 90% of the 197 nations in favor of rewarding Muslims who perpetrated 10/7 with the terrorist state carved out of the heart of Israel. 90%. You'll have some 5% who will abstain, and fewer than 5% who will vote against. But ultimately, over the next 10 months, as a payment for the bribe that he received from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates, totaling $16.5 billion, Trump is going to betray Israel. He is going to be the Neville Chamberlain. And Israel will be his Czechoslovakia. And Muslims will be his Nazis. And World War III will be the result. And it's going to, he says, occur for 1 week based upon a single promise during a particular Shabuah. Echad Shabuah, one Shabuah. Now, there are two ways of choosing that one Shabuah, and I've shared that with you in our last program. It can be the Shabuah 7 years and 4 months from the fulfillment of Towrah in 2033 when it's all over, and that one Shabuah would be the 22nd of May, 2026, a Shabat. And I think that is likely the one Shabuah that this covenant with many to make Israel vulnerable and to destroy, creating the killing fields against millions of Jews, which is why this is being brought up. I think that is this particular Shabuah that allows slightly over 7 years to the end. We are given the specifics, and we shared with you those specifics in our last program of 2,300 days from Towrahless fulfillment in year 6,000 Yah 2033. That brings us to another Shabbat, a Shabuah fulfillment of 11th of June of 2027. I think both Shabuahs are in play. Even though this says one Shabuah, it is on one particular Shabuah that this covenant, this treaty with many, will be affirmed by the exceedingly influential, self-aggrandizing, and overbearing person the world knows now as Donald Trump, who is demon-possessed and who will be controlled by Satan to accomplish this. That Shabuah being 22 May of 2026. Giving up the land that Yahweh gave to Yisrael, that Dod protected on behalf of Yisrael, that Dod unified his people within, around the city of Dod, is heartbreaking beyond imagination for this king, which is why he is specifying the Shabuah that is 7 years before all of this is resolved, pursuant to what he has just revealed in his previous statements. And this, of course, is the affirmation that it is Donald Trump who is the Towrahless one and the great betrayer, sabotaging Dod's nation. And it says halfway through the week, he will stop the observance of the Shabbat and seek to forestall the benefit of the sacrifice which had been freely offered as a gift. Now, this is quite important. First, the next Shabbat that matters is going to be the Shabbat of Shabuah. It's a Friday evening and Saturday of the 11th of June in 2027. Satan will know all about that, and he will do everything he can to forestall that, because the moment that Shabuah occurs, the rest of it is a lay down hand. We will prevail from that point. Our most important necessity on behalf of completing what Yahweh once accomplished is to have a harvest of quality individuals who will make the covenant family rich and inviting, entertaining and enlightening for Yahweh. These will be the teachers of the millennial Shabbat. These are God's most prominent sons and daughters. And Satan knows that. Satan knows that should we prevail in nurturing this harvest, it's over for him. He'll play out his cards. He'll do the maximum amount of carnage of Israel. But for him, it's over. The moment we get to the Shabuah. Rich, you and I were talking earlier today. And I said, if I am convinced that after the 3 years that we spend in Shamaim with Yahweh, and that with the addition of the great orator Elia, who just exudes credibility and confidence, more so than really anyone who has ever spoken for Yahweh. He's the man that looked the hideous king and his queen in the eye and said, "No, you're the troubler of Israel, not I." He's the one who ordered the king to bring all of his religious prophets of Baal, the Lord, and Asherah, the queen of heaven and the mother of God, the false god who would play such a role in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, to assemble all of those prophets. And he is the one who made a mockery of them in front of the king and queen. And he is the one who pursued the king and queen such that they both died, as did every religious proponent in Israel. With Eliah's arrival, as articulate, as wise, as credible as he is, and with our prominent position on the Temple Mount, with Yahowah having this moving scroll above us, making us impenetrable, such that no matter what the world brings against us, nothing harms us. Having a replica of the tent of the restoring witness on the Temple Mount, having destroyed the dome of the ugliness and the mosque of the hideousness, the credibility that goes along with that is just enormous. And all we have to do is, between worldwide, have a sufficient number of quality individuals who just stop being overtly religious and political. They don't have to be perfect. They just have to be misled as opposed to misleading. That's all we have to do. And to garner that kind of an audience, and it's worldwide, because Yahweh is going to bring them in from around the world, in addition to those that are near Jerusalem. I don't see any way that collectively, collaboratively, in that environment, that we won't succeed. And we're a little bit, not totally, but we're somewhat more isolated now. You know, we do have the seven spirits of Yahweh. We have his word being revealed beyond what has ever happened previously. We have more insights into the word of God, more understanding of it than has happened in the previous 3,000 years. So we've got a lot going for us. And we have the opportunity of this program and a whole team to promote this message. And the 35 books that sit on the bookshelf of YAHOWAH.com sitting behind me. This new beautiful website with the flip books on it, and the integration of our audio messages here, the video presentations. We've got a lot going for us. And Yahweh has told us in no uncertain terms that he's proud of what we accomplish and that we will prevail on Shabuah. There will be a harvest of upstanding grain. But, Israel's a tough audience. And the fact of the matter is that we will prevail. And this Towrahless one, this great betrayer of Israel, Satan possessing him, is going to do everything he can to diminish the observant Shabbat of this Shabuah. That's the reason I think that Shabuah, and halfway through the week, stop the observance of the Shabbat. If he can preclude Shabuah, then he's in a very different and more empowered position, but he won't. And by forestalling the benefit of the sacrifice, he's not stopping the sacrifices, because there won't be sacrifices resumed. There's no temple. There's no place to do the sacrifices. The sacrifices are not going to be resumed. As a matter of fact, in Judaism, they have a whole workaround to avoid doing the sacrifices. The whole purpose of Judaism was initially to do away with all of God's instructions pursuant to these sacrifices, so they could come up with a religion that they could impose on fellow Jews that didn't require them. And they just wrote them out of their religion. So there is no chance that the rabbis are going to reestablish sacrifices. Christianity is not going to reestablish them either. And God doesn't care what the Muslims do. Doesn't care what the Christians do either. But clearly they will not be reestablished. And so what this is saying is that the sacrifice that Dode has made to make it possible for us to become immortal and not guilty, such that we become children of the covenant. It's that sacrifice that he wishes the benefits to be forestalled, so that it's not perceived to be offered as a gift to be capitalized upon. And the most extreme aspect of this vile and abhorrent action of repulsive religious idolatry will be to devastate, desolate, and incapacitate up to the very end, bringing destruction and annihilation along with the conclusion of the restoring witness. Well, there's two aspects here. One is that by disallowing the integration of matzah into the as the week-long celebration of which Pesach is just the first day, what we're going to see is Hasatan. He explains this in the book of Ezekiel. What he's going to do is he's going to move the date of Pesach so that it's more coterminous with Easter and Ashura Day. Then he is going to completely remove all aspects of matzah and bakurim from its celebration, so that it makes all of those who follow his edict hellbound, because they will be immortal and imperfect. So there is no option for them but to follow Hasatan into Sheol. Misery loves company, you know. And then he's going to ban the observation of the other Moed Mikre. And by doing that, his intent will be to forestall anyone benefiting, say, from the Towrah harvest or the Towrah sacrifice of the Adamah Parah. And therefore, through his religious idolatry, he is going to seek to devastate and desolate, incapacitate, right to the very end. But in the very end, there will be the annihilation and thus the conclusion of the restoring witness, at least in the form that he is in up to this point. He is Yada. He is the partner of Elia as one of the two last witnesses. And his job will be to offer his corporeal body as the bull, as the parah, as the par, as the bakar, as the Adamah Parah on Towrah. And it is what God does with this on Towrah that purges Yisrael of her guilt, and that also seals Hasatan's fate, and that is his very end. And it says it's going to occur quickly and decisively, with determination and with decrees, profusely poured out upon the deserted, desolated, and destroyed, who are astonished and stupefied, and who will perish because they are too stunned to respond. Boy, that is what we see today. People who are just too stunned to respond. They are just stupefied and astonished. I watch the world through the lens of social media, particularly on X. And what I see is a devolution of humankind to the point that very few people are what I would consider human anymore. They have lost their conscience. They have lost their nesama. They have lost their ability to distinguish between right and wrong, good and bad. And in so doing, they are counterproductive. They add nothing and are simply stupefied and stunned. Nobodies, worthless souls of less value than, a slug. That's just what has happened. An entire generation, maybe two, has been dumbed down to the point they can no longer think. And if you can't think, there really is no future. They're worthless. And so that's the prediction, the prophecy that Doe delivered. And I wanted you to see it from that perspective so that you would know what to expect, what is being discussed. We went through it in our last program, but not with this level of detail. Now, in our last program, I also shared Isaiah 17, 4 and 5. And it was the pivotal place that changed our perspective, my perspective, on how all of these events will play out. Because it speaks of a harvest of standing grain. That harvest of standing grain is Shabuah, tying these prophecies together. And of Israel being dissected, eviscerated at the waist so that she becomes indefensible, which is this very covenant with many. And how those events are tied together just as they were tied together in Daniel. And then as we went through this, we found the role of the parah, this productive bull that he plays, and then how that is all part of a gleaning on Towrah, along with the sacrifice of the Adamah parah, and where that leads us. And then in the 18th chapter, there's a whole chapter devoted to the fact that the great betrayer is Donald Trump in the United States of America. So here's some insights just from Isaiah 17, beginning at the 4th statement. And then it will actually come to pass in that day that the size of Israel will be decreased to the point of no longer being sustainable. Then the most important place at the midsection of his body will be leaned, shrinking in size, sacrificed in a counterproductive and unsustainable manner as part of the hidden agenda of diseased dignitaries. That's why I know that the two-state dissolution of Israel, the creation of a Palestinian state. There are no Palestinians. There is no Palestine. It's an ethnic and genocidal slur, one created by Hadrian because of what Bar Kokhba uprising that was promoted by Rabbi Akiba. That's why we know it's going to happen. And that's why we know when it's going to happen. And it shall become like the gathering in and receiving of a harvest at the proper time toward the end, which must be cut short due to the extent of man's provocation and anger, reaping the standing grain from the chaff in season, cutting it away so as to remove it from a vexing time of grief, thereby establishing and validating the prominent and mature grain. Now, what this gives us is not only another affirmation that this is Shabuah, that is the harvest, it's the next harvest, and it is a harvest of standing grain. It's of wheats. Very different than Bakurim, which is a barley harvest, which is cut while the harvest is still young and flexible and green, not standing and mature, as is the wheat harvest in May, June. But this gives us every bit of the latitude that I have spoken of previously, where both Shabuahs come into play. May 22nd of 2026, June 11th of 2027. Because it shall come like the gathering in and receiving of a harvest at the proper time toward the end, which must be cut short due to the extent of man's provocation. That 7 years has to be cut short. That is when Yahweh intervenes with the Adamah parah, with Eliah being the master of ceremonies, to end all rebellion on Towrah, the 24th of September in 2033, of course, is Shabat. And that is when man's provocation and Satan's provocation is cut short. And there's great anger. So this reaping of the standing grain and chaff in season, cutting it away so as to remove it from a vexing time of grief, it could say out of a vexing time of grief, and then you would assume that it would take place on the Shabuah in 2026. But when it says from a time, and that's the primary translation of men in this case, of vexing trouble, this would be from the time of Jacob's trouble, then it can be during that period. So the Shabbat, the first Shabuah during that period would be the natural time for us to expect this fulfillment of the harvest of standing grain, giving us a full year in the time of trouble, before it becomes exceedingly vicious, for us to continue to share Yahowah's story, the story of his beloved son, our Messiah and King, Dowd. And that is what's being conveyed here, thereby establishing and validating the prominent and mature grain. We are going to be prominent at this time. We're going to validate the truth at this time. And it gives us that full year to be able to do so. It's just such a perfect interpretation of these two Shabuah and the purpose and intent of each. And when you think of it too, when you look at Neville Chamberlain's sacrifice of Czechoslovakia, which he, of course, had no right to give to Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. But when he did so to achieve peace in our time, which will be coterminous to Donald Trump giving Israel, the high ground of Israel, to the Muslims to achieve peace in our time, not his to give. War does not start the day the appeasement occurs. It takes the militants a while to amass their weapons and to strategize their plans. And in this case, it'll be Alaska Flood 2.0. It's described vividly in Yoel and in Yashaya of terrorists flooding into Israel in numbers that are beyond measure, beyond what can even be counted. A tsunami of blackness. And in one place here, we actually read there's an influx of Arabs, a swarm of noxious Arabs that are going to come into Israel. There's going to be in the range of 2 to 4 million of them. And for all of them to be marshaled into position and armed and engaged in this great terrorist attack, which will be, again, like Alaska Flood, in that the use of tanks and armored personnel carriers and this sort of thing will be essentially meaningless. It's going to be a bombardment of the major cities with drones and missiles and rockets, probably 1,000 times more than Alaska Flood 1.0. And 1,000 times the number of jihadists, and they will go into all of the smaller communities and they will rape and plunder, and terrorize and abduct and murder. And that's going to happen a year after the covenant that dissects, eviscerates Israel, just as it did in Neville Chamberlain's piece in our time to We Had War of the Worlds. I think that is what is being described here. Now, this goes on to speak of one of the most important titles that is ascribed to any man, and in this time, this title is ascribed to 3 men. That title would be what, my friend? No, Zeroah. Yeah, Palmoni is in Daniel. It is evidently it's Elias' pet name for the role I play. Isaiah has many titles for the role that I have been asked to play. One of his favorites is Zeroah. And it says also his Zeroah, the one who sows and cultivates his seeds, will produce a harvest. And it will be as one would conduct a gleaning, a secondary harvest of first fruits. In the valley of Rephaim, in the midst of those destined to die who were too set apart or too set in their ways to be harvestable, so that they are just apathetic, too inert to prevail. They won't exert the effort required. Apathy, stuck in their ways, culturally stymied. But this Zeroah, who is the same fellow is the Adamah Parah. He is the Palmoni. He is the Bakor. He is the Par Bull. He is the Choder. Many, many titles for the same individual. He is going to be cultivating and sowing the seeds that produce the harvest, and that will be of Shabuah. And then he will also conduct a gleaning. That's a Lakat, and that will take place on Towrah, which is the secondary harvest. It is a first fruits harvest as well in the valley of Raphamim, in the midst of the horrors that are taking place within Israel. In him and Jacob, Israel, covenant, there will be those souls who will be spared and survive, in addition to the physical bodies of those who will be left behind, gleanings of those purposefully left on the vine and in going around at the right time to remove them from a threatening and dangerous situation, encompassing and striking them with a branch, such as a means of harvesting an olive tree. That says a lot, but the Towrah gleaning, it's Lakat, is of olives, and we're told that they will come from two places, 2 or 3 from the uppermost branches, that would be Yehudah, and 4 or 5 from the branches which were cut away, that would be Jerusalem. This is the final opportunity to become immortal, not guilty forevermore, and enriched and empowered as part of the covenant family during the evening of Towrah. And at that same time, there will be those who are left behind as mortals. And that will be the purpose of the Parah, this productive bull, to make the sacrifice to purge and restore them. So there will be 2 or 3 ripe olives in the uppermost branch, Yehudim, and 4 or 5 in its fruitful and productive branches, which were separated and cut away, just like the 10 tribes were separated and cut away from Israel. They represent those that were cut away, while Yahud is always Yahweh's beloved, the uppermost of the tribes. All of this is prophetically declared by Yahweh, the God of Israel. He's not the God of Christianity. He's not the God of Goyim. He is not the God of a church. He is not the God of Rome. He's not the God of America. He's the God of Israel. Now that can include more than Israelites, because in its best interpretation, Israel is from Yisrael, individuals who engage and endure with God. I'm counted among them, and so are many others. Now there is also, this is an announcement and a warning to everyone who thirsts. Choose to walk towards the water, because God is providing a source of cleansing water. At this time, under the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah, as was the case when Eliah performed the same feat at the sacrifice of the bull 2,888 years prior to this moment, there will be this upwelling of water from beneath the Temple Mount. And God says, choose to walk towards it. This is the waters of life. These are the waters that will purge you. This is the source of cleansing and of life. Let the one who wants to enjoy the benefits of the relationship do so without cost. God, this is the gift of Yahweh and of his Choder, of the one who has volunteered to make this offering. Do so without cost, because the path to walk to get the most enjoyment out of life does not require anyone to pay anything. He is contrasting this with Judaism, which is a pay-as-you-go scheme, enriching rabbis. You have to pay them for everything, for the food that you eat, for the instructions on how to restrict your life, to bless your kitchen, to bless your life. Everything is a price. To be a member of the synagogue, to have a good seat in the synagogue. Everything is a price. God's saying, no, no, no. I don't want anything. I don't want your money. I'm offering this gift. You have been given the opportunity to go about acquiring food, not having to buy it with the rabbinical cost associated with it, choosing to procure and obtain which is needed and nourishing, and wine without any money, and milk without remuneration or compensation. That wine represents the blood sacrifice of Pesach, Passover, that Dode made, and the Towrah sacrifice that the bull, the par, and parah will make. And without milk, because at this point, they will be neophytes in the relationship, brand new babies, and need to be nurtured, and the milk will be their means of nurture. So please explain, why do you spend? He's asking Jews, why do they waste their money on the rabbis? Why do you spend continually paying out money for that which is not actually nourishing, such that your labor is not satisfying and produces nothing of lasting value? The most tortured religion in the history of religions is Judaism. Jews have concocted more ways to waste one's life than has ever been conceived by all religions combined. And it produces nothing of value. And God's saying, why do you do that garbage? He says, listen to me. And they can't even do that. No, they're praying, they're yabbering all the time. They talk over God. Listen to me and be nourished by that which is good, by that which is useful and beneficial, productive and valuable. With these being the most desirable and beneficial options for your soul. God is pleading with his people to accept what he's offering, as opposed to what the rabbis have taken from them. Incline your ear, listen, doing so with your own volition, and choose to walk to me. There's only one path you can walk to God. Pesach, Matzah, Bikurim, Shavua, Teruah, Kippurim, and Sukkah. Decide to actually listen so that your soul may continue to exist. We must, Shama, listen to what God says if we wish to live with him. Then he says, then, if you listen to me, I will cut you into establishing for you the everlasting Berith covenant, which was affirmed and verified with unremitting love and unfailing devotion by Dode. Yeshaya, Isaiah 55:3, and there ends Judaism, Christianity, Islam. It's all gone. Yahowah will cut you into the covenant if you listen to what he has to say, because it was affirmed and verified in unremitting love and unfailing devotion by Dode, David, the Messiah, the King, the very Son of God, our Savior. There is none other. There is no room for a Mr. Christ. There is no room for a Bar Kokhba. There is no room for an Akiba and a Maimonides, a Paul or a Mark or a Luke or a Peter or a Muhammad. It is all affirmed by Dode. It is all accomplished by Dode. The very covenant is delivered to you by Dode. If you listen to God, that's where his words take you. That is the single most important truth you will ever hear in your life. Whether you avail yourself of it or toss it away is completely up to you. But that is the truth that unlocks heaven's door. That is your ticket to eternal life. That's your means to be adopted into the covenant family. There is none other. Now presently, therefore, an and enduring witness, with restoring testimony, regarding the means to return, who will be providing evidence regarding eternity for as long as time permits, to the people of every ethnicity and culture being gathered, to the community being brought together and assembled for this reason, I will bestow, offering him also as a gift, bringing him forward at this time and devoting him to this purpose as an authorized counterpart and a prince, publicly promoting the truth, a conspicuous messenger announcing what needs to be said and known. As the leader of the royal family, and as an instructor and teacher providing direction, who is appointed, ordained, and in charge, whose authority is not questioned. For an archaic and misled world of people from every ethnicity and culture who are now gathered for this common cause. Yahowah Isaiah 55:4. And you have just witnessed the fulfillment of this prophecy.